Hello, welcome to the USNTPS Model Phase 2 tutorial. My name is Christopher Nicholas.
And I'm Ruel Maldonado.
And we are going to show you how to use the model and give you some things to consider. So first thing to consider is that it is important not to add any columns or rows to any of the spreadsheets, because essentially this model is being run by VBA code in the background. And altering any columns or rows could disrupt the code and make the model not work the way it's supposed to. So just keep that in mind. Anything to be modified is going to be done through this user form. So for instance, all exercise information that needs to be modified should be done through this user form. So we can select, if we're looking at QP513, we can go ahead and find that exercise. You can either type it in and it'll automatically predict it, predictive text, or you can just look through it from this list. So let's go to QP513, click the tab button, and as you can see, everything shows up the way it's supposed to. So if we go to, just for an example, let's say we decide to change the start week of this exercise to week 5 for whatever reason. So then you go ahead and hit the submit button. Exercise information successfully updated, and what you'll notice is the exercise has now changed to week 5, and it is now here starting at August 19th rather than July 22nd as it was previously. So let's just go ahead and move it back to the way it was before, and there you go, it has moved back to the proper date. And the same thing goes for aircraft reliability information, aircraft what-if scenarios. All instructors will be added or deleted using this user form. And it's important to note that when deleting an instructor, it's going to delete them from every instance within the model. So be sure to use this button with caution, and it'll warn you of that. And adding instructors and all that good stuff is right here. Instructor what if, this is used to find exercises and to add qualified instructors to this exercise. So whenever you need to change qual information, you use the instructor what if tab. And it's called instructor what if because you can do what if scenarios on these exercises. Say if we had, let's just go back to one that's not strictly student. Okay. So what if we had 10 instructors? How does that affect instructor reliability? And you can see that it moved up a little bit, given that if we had more instructors, we'd have more instructor reliability for that exercise. Okay, so now let's just talk about the kind of the dashboard here. This is the dashboard of the model. This is where you're going to find the curriculum. Let's see here. So this is essentially the 1542 document, but in an easy to understand format. So you have the exercise code, the name of the exercise, and it's important to note that you see these little red triangles at the top corners of these cells. It tells you the exercise name and the correct syllabus it's tied to. Aircraft information, start and end dates, the duration of time designated to that exercise, how many weeks are left until the due date, how many X's are completed for each syllabus for that exercise, how many X's are remaining for that exercise, how many X's are required per week in order to meet the due date, the exercise completion, the priority value. I just need to zoom in a little bit so you can see that, the priority value, and then all of the reliability information that was touched on in the user guide for the first model. So just starting out, it's important whenever you're starting a new semester to put the correct number of airborne system students, fixed wing students, and rotary wing students. Another important feature is this little almost scorecard here. What it does is it allows you to see instances of total X's completed per syllabus for the semester. So at this moment in time, just using this as an example, if it was August 5th, at this moment in time, we have about 7% of the X's completed out of the total 400 for airborne system students, about 14% for fixed wing, and 17% for rotary wing. So this is cool for breakpoints and certain things like that if you need to get an idea of where you are in terms of completing this semester's total X's required. Another thing to consider is that you have daylight savings start and end times. It's very important to establish what these values are at the beginning of the semester to make sure that when the model is scheduling exercises, it takes into account the right amount of time designated to each time period. Now, Ruel is going to discuss the scheduling tool, model resource pools tabs, and everything else associated with that.
Okay, so first we're going to hit the clear schedule button. So just as a quick overview, you have the two buttons on this scheduling tool. So your schedule button is to schedule actual exercises, and the clear schedule is to erase it and sort of regroup in a sense.
Go.
So what you'll notice over here is an exercise priority listing. So what this is of the current exercises that are active at the moment, what are their priorities? So this list is based off of the model tab right over here. So it lists these exercises in order of priority, with, for example, the highest values being used first. Another important consideration is this priority cell right here. So if you notice, it says AS, which stands for Airborne Systems. Now this value is calculated based off of the model spreadsheet as well. So what you'll notice is that Airborne Systems has the least percentage completed of its entire syllabus. So what this value does is it is output right here. That way the model knows that Airborne Systems is the one at risk of not being completed relative to the other two exercise syllabuses. Now, before we schedule the exercises for this week, let's look at the Model 2 resource pools in order to determine where the scheduling is coming from. What we have here are three tables, one for non-instrumented, instrumented, and instructors. Now, these are all the resources that the scheduling tool will pull from in order to make a schedule. So how it works is you hit this Prep Resource Tables button, and what it does is it sorts all of the resources that would be required for the active exercises that are currently being analyzed. So what determines whether an exercise is active or not is whether at the current time you are in the time window of that exercise being open. So as a quick example, these exercises here that are listed with higher priority values are ones that would be considered in the scheduling tool. Exercises such as these that have no-go listed will not be considered. So the reason for this is because the time now is at August the 5th. So this exercise here is on August the 12th, and such it is not an open exercise. Now we'll perform an actual scheduling using the scheduling tool. So what you would do is go over here and click the schedule button. So this is what the schedule will output. If you notice, there are 2 time periods per day. As such, there are 2 time periods shown in the model. Now, what you'll notice is these exercises are listed by priority. So, for example, the jet demonstration corresponds to C0411. That's the flight. So what you'll notice is that it only scheduled 3 of this exercise, and then it moved on to the next exercise, the FT501. The reason for this is because when we look back at the model spreadsheet, we notice right here that there are only 3 X's remaining for this C0411. So the model understands that once we get through an exercise and it is completed, it will no longer be scheduling that exercise. An important note to discuss is the fact that this model does not update these sortie numbers here. Now these are the numbers that determine how many X's are remaining. The reason for this is simply because we wanted to have a tool for you guys to use. However, as mentioned, it is simply a tool. So if you guys find out that there's something you feel is better, then you can use that. Also, it is important to note that these values here, which would determine the sorties remaining, are user inputs. So, for example, if I were to go to the fixed wing and say that 10 more sorties, or 3 more sorties were completed, let's say, for example, and I were to hit enter, it would change how many sorties are remaining, and it would also change its priority value. So that's something to take into account as well. So moving back to the scheduling tool tab, what you'll notice is that all 5 days are listed here. Now, how the model runs is it considers how much time is left remaining in a time period, how many resources are left available, such as aircraft, amount of aircraft, and instructors, and sorties remaining as well. So as mentioned before, the 3 sorties are completed, so it will no longer schedule this exercise. Now, another important thing to consider is what was unused in a time period. Underneath each time period's schedule, what you'll notice are unused resources. Now, these include the aircraft, the amount of aircraft, and the instructors as well. So what this allows the USNTPS staff to do is determine where can these instructors be used. So for example, in this time period, we have 6 exercises that are being used. So with those 6 exercises, what's left over are the following resources: these aircraft by these amount and these instructors. So what one might do is realize, oh, maybe we can do, for example, put Gavin as a qualified instructor for one of these exercises. So that way Gavin could eventually be added into the schedule. It's a very sensitivity analysis based tool that is useful for the USNTPS staff. Once the USNTPS staff is done analyzing this baseline schedule made by the model, in order to clear all the information, one would simply go to the Clear Schedule button and click it. Now all information is cleared out, and a new schedule iteration may be considered if that is what the USNTPS staff desires. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris with the model's dashboard and conclude from there.
Thank you, Arel. Now, one thing we did forget to mention was this time now function. Now, when first starting a new semester, what you want to do is set this to the now function as such. What this function does is it displays the current date. So as you can see, today is May 14th, and that is the accurate date displayed. This is important so that when you open the model, you can ensure that the model is running off of the current date. But as you may know, this is also an option, so you can, for instance, set this equal to September 22nd and do a for instance analysis of, where would we be in the schedule if the date was the 22nd of September. So let's go ahead and put it back to July 22nd, as if we were at the beginning of a semester. And another thing before we end this tutorial is to look at how to manually modify the aircraft resource tables. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you may notice that this looks a little bit different than it did at the beginning of the video. That's because this section of the video was done at a later time after we had made a few modifications. So just to touch on that, there's now contracted. So if there's a contracted aircraft, that will be reflected. So if we look at FESY555 FLT, you'll see that is a contracted exercise. So it has a proportion of 1 for under contracted. Now if you want to change aircraft reliability data, that's going to be done in this tab. But when you want to change how many aircraft you have for instrumented and non-instrumented, that will be done here. So for example, let's say that we know that at the start of the week we have 4 instrumented C-12s and 2 non-instrumented C-12s. We will make the appropriate changes and click submit. You'll get the notification that data has been submitted successfully. And if we go to the Model 2 resource pools, you will notice that the C12 has 2's across the board for non-instrumented and 4's across the board for instrumented. So it's important to do that before running the model, so the model runs off the correct number of current assets. And as mentioned previously, we did modify the instructor what if tab is now called instructor X assign, because we believe this more accurately reflects what the purpose of this tab is to assign instructors to exercises. But you also have the what if capability that we discussed earlier in the video. And that pretty much does it. So thank you very much for your time. And we hope that this model is useful to the USNTPS staff. Thank you.